They're guarding this one particular area. They won't let anybody look at it. They won't let anybody talk about it. They started doing a deep dive into history and historical accounts of the covenant and the ark and all these bizarre stories that have lasted throughout history.
Picture this. Archaeologists are digging through an ancient site in the West Bank, and what they pull out of the ground stops the entire academic world cold.
A large amount of historians believe that the Ark of the Covenant was in Jerusalem up to 587 BC. After that, it's almost entirely absent from the biblical text.
We're talking about physical, measurable, undeniable evidence tied directly to one of the most hunted objects in all of human history, the Ark of the Covenant. The headlines went absolutely wild. But here's the thing, the real story is even more fascinating than what they're selling you. What is the Ark of the Covenant, and why does everyone lose their mind over it? Let's back up for a second, because if we're going to talk about this properly, you need to understand just how enormous the Ark of the Covenant is. Not just religiously, but culturally, historically, and yes, archaeologically. According to the Hebrew Bible, the Ark of the Covenant was a gold-covered wooden chest, constructed by the Israelites under the direct instructions of God, delivered through Moses on Mount Sinai. It was built to house the 2 stone tablets inscribed with the 10 Commandments. But it wasn't just a fancy box. The Ark was considered the literal dwelling place of God's presence on earth, the most sacred object in all of ancient Israelite religion. The book of Exodus describes it in specific, almost architectural detail. It was roughly 2.5 cubits long, 1.5 cubits wide, and 1.5 cubits high, which translates to approximately 45 inches by 27 inches. It was made of acacia wood, overlaid inside and out with pure gold. On top sat a solid gold cover called the mercy seat, flanked by 2 golden cherubim, angelic figures with outstretched wings facing each other. It had golden rings fixed to its 4 corners through which poles were threaded for carrying, because it could never be touched directly. That detail alone tells you something. This wasn't just an important object. It was treated as something dangerously holy, so sacred that direct contact was forbidden. It traveled with the Israelites through the wilderness. It parted the Jordan River. It brought down the walls of Jericho. According to the books of Samuel, enemy forces who captured it were struck with plagues and disasters until they sent it back. And for decades, it resided in a place called Shiloh, an ancient Israelite sanctuary in the hill country of Canaan that sat at the center of tribal religious life before Jerusalem even entered the picture. Shiloh was, for a significant stretch of early Israelite history, the spiritual capital of a people. Then, around the 10th century BCE, the Ark disappeared from the biblical record after the Babylonians sacked Jerusalem, and it has never been officially found since. Historians, treasure hunters, conspiracy theorists, and serious academics have been chasing it ever since. So when word broke that something extraordinary had been unearthed at Tel Shiloh, the very location where the Ark once rested, people absolutely lost it. So what exactly did they find? And why are even the skeptics struggling to dismiss it? The discovery that broke the internet, what was actually found at Tel Shiloh. Here's where it gets really juicy. Tel Shiloh is an archaeological site in the modern-day West Bank, and it has been excavated on and off for decades. But recent excavations, led by Dr. Scott Stripling of the Associates for Biblical Research, have turned up something that nobody was fully prepared for. What the team uncovered was a monumental stone structure dating back to the Iron Age I period, roughly the time frame when, according to biblical accounts, the Ark would have been kept at Shiloh. We're talking about a structure so precisely constructed that when archaeologists measured it, the dimensions matched the biblical description of the tabernacle, the sacred portable dwelling designed to house the Ark, almost exactly. The structure is oriented east to west and is divided in a 2-to-1 ratio. If you know your Torah or your Old Testament, you'll recognize that immediately. The tabernacle, as described in Exodus, was precisely twice as long as it was wide, divided into two compartments, the holy place and the Holy of Holies, the inner chamber where the ark itself would have resided. This was not a vague resemblance. The proportions align with the biblical specifications in a way that is difficult to chalk up to coincidence. And it didn't stop there. Around the structure, excavators found over 100,000 animal bones, predominantly from sheep, goats, and cattle. And here's the detail that made researchers genuinely pause. The bones were overwhelmingly from the right side of the animals' bodies. That's not random. That matches the biblical prescription for sacrificial offerings, where specific portions, including the right thigh, were designated for priestly use. This wasn't a trash heap. This was a ritual site, operating according to a very specific, religiously mandated pattern. Think about the sheer scale of that for a second. 100,000 bones. That is not the remnant of a casual meal or even a modest community ritual. That is the evidence of a large-scale, organized, sustained sacrificial system. The kind that the Bible describes operating at Shiloh over generations, serving the needs of an entire tribal confederation coming to worship at a central sanctuary. The numbers match the story. Ritual pottery was found at the site as well. Everything at Tel Shiloh points to a major, organized, ongoing religious operation. Exactly what you'd expect from a site that served as the spiritual capital of ancient Israel for generations. When you stack the architectural proportions, the sacrificial bone assemblage, the ritual ceramics, and the confirmed Iron Age one dating all on top of each other, you start to understand why the headlines went ballistic. But hold on. If this is so compelling, why aren't experts calling it the discovery of the century? What's the catch? The critical distinction. Okay, let's pump the brakes, just slightly, because this is where intellectual honesty matters, and honestly, the truth is still stunning enough that we don't need to oversell it. What was found at Tel Shiloh was not the Ark of the Covenant itself. Let's be absolutely clear about that. The Ark, that gold-covered chest, was not pulled out of the ground. Nobody is holding it. Nobody photographed it. It was not found. What was found is compelling archaeological evidence that Shiloh was, without question, a major Israelite religious site operating during the precise historical period when the Ark would have been kept there. Dr. Scott Stripling, the site's director, put it plainly. It matches the biblical account to a degree that's hard to ignore. That's a significant statement coming from a trained archaeologist. He's not saying he found the Ark. He's saying the physical evidence on the ground aligns so closely with the biblical narrative of the tabernacle that skepticism becomes genuinely difficult to maintain. And Stripling is not a fringe figure. He's a credentialed field archaeologist with decades of excavation experience, and his team has been operating at Tel Shiloh with academic rigor. Think about what that means for the broader historical picture. For decades, critics of biblical archaeology argued that sites like Shiloh were mythological, that there was no physical evidence to support the existence of this grand religious complex described in Scripture. This discovery dismantles that argument. The tabernacle that housed the Ark? The archaeological evidence says it was real. The sacrificial system described in Leviticus? The 100,000 bones and the right side pattern say it was real. Shiloh as the religious heart of ancient Israel? Verified. And here's the thing. The public fascination with the Ark is so enormous, so deeply wired into our collective imagination, that even the hint of a discovery sends people into a frenzy. That's not a flaw in us. It makes complete sense. This is one of the most mythologized objects in human history. And when evidence surfaces that puts us one step closer to its world, the instinct is to reach for the biggest possible version of the story. But what the Tel Shiloh evidence actually gives us, a confirmed tabernacle site, a verified sacrificial system, a real religious community living out the biblical narrative in the biblical location, is already one of the more significant finds in biblical archaeology in years. The tabernacle being archaeologically confirmed at its biblical location is a massive deal. It just asks us to sit with something more nuanced than a single dramatic revelation. So if the tabernacle is confirmed, where on earth is the ark? And has anyone ever actually come close to finding it? The Cold Trail, where the ark went and why nobody can find it. This is the part of the story that historians have been arguing about for centuries, and it's genuinely one of the great unsolved mysteries of the ancient world. The ark's last confirmed biblical mention places it in the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem, the first temple constructed around the 10th century BCE. It was kept in the temple's innermost chamber, the Holy of Holies, where only the high priest could enter, and only once a year on Yom Kippur. Then in 586 BCE, the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar II sacked Jerusalem, destroyed the first temple, and carried off vast amounts of treasure. The Book of Kings lists many items taken, but the ark? It's conspicuously absent from that inventory. It simply disappears from the record. No mention of destruction, no mention of capture, no mention at all. It's as if the most sacred object in the Israelite world just quietly ceased to exist at the most violent moment in that world's history, and nobody wrote down what happened to it. That silence has fueled centuries of speculation. Some historians believe the ark was destroyed when the temple burned, that the chest, made of wood underneath its gold overlay, simply didn't survive the fire. Others theorize it was hidden before the Babylonian invasion, squirreled away by priests who saw the attack coming. The Book of Maccabees, a text included in Catholic and Orthodox Christian canon, though not in the Hebrew Bible, suggests that the prophet Jeremiah hid the ark in a cave on Mount Nebo before the Babylonian siege, though this account is not considered historically verified. There are even suggestions that it was taken to Egypt during an earlier conflict, potentially during the reign of Pharaoh Shishak, around 925 BCE, roughly 50 years after Solomon's reign. The most persistent and frankly most dramatic alternative theory involves Ethiopia. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church has maintained for centuries that the Ark of the Covenant is currently in their possession, housed in a small treasury chapel adjacent to the Church of St. Mary of Zion in Aksum. Church leaders claim it has been guarded there continuously for millennia, brought to Ethiopia by Menelik I, the son of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, according to a medieval Ethiopian text called the Kebra Nagast. It's a captivating claim. The Ethiopian Orthodox tradition is ancient. The Kebra Nagast is a serious piece of religious literature, and the Church of St. Mary of Zion in Aksum is genuinely one of the most important sites in Ethiopian Christianity. But here's the inconvenient reality. The claim is entirely unverifiable. Access to the chapel is restricted to a single guardian monk, and no outside researcher, archaeologist, or journalist has been permitted to examine the object. The Ethiopian claim cannot be confirmed and cannot be denied. It sits in a frustrating limbo of faith and secrecy that has persisted for generations. So what does the broader archaeological and academic community actually make of the Tel Shiloh findings? And why does it matter so much beyond just the Ark itself? What the experts are saying and why. This find reshapes biblical archaeology. Here's where the story gets genuinely exciting for people who care about history. Not just the treasure hunt, but the actual, on-the-ground rewriting of what we know about the ancient world. Biblical archaeology has always existed in a contested space. On one side, you have scholars and theologians who believe the biblical record is historically accurate. On the other, you have minimalist historians, a school of thought that became particularly influential in the late 20th century, who argue that much of the Old Testament is literary mythology with little archaeological backing. The Tel Shiloh excavations are throwing a significant wrench into the minimalist position. The stone structure's dimensions, the sacrificial bone assemblage, the ritual pottery. Taken together, these constitute what archaeologists call a convergence of evidence. No single piece of data proves the biblical narrative, but the cumulative picture is hard to explain away. You would have to argue that an ancient Canaanite or early Israelite community happened to construct a structure matching tabernacle proportions, happened to carry out a sacrifice ritual involving predominantly right-sided animal portions as described in Leviticus, and happened to do it all at the precise location named in the biblical text. That's a lot of coincidences stacking up. Dr. Stripling and his team have been careful and methodical in how they've presented these findings, deliberately avoiding sensationalism, even as the popular press ran wild with headlines about the Ark being found. The actual academic position is more measured. This is compelling evidence that Shiloh functioned as described in biblical texts, and that the Israelite religious traditions documented in Scripture had a real, physical, archaeological footprint. That matters enormously, not just to believers, but to anyone interested in ancient history. It validates Shiloh's place in the religious geography of the ancient Near East and confirms that the site was operating as a significant cult center during the Iron Age I period, roughly 1200 to 1000 BCE, the period when, biblically, the Ark would have rested there. For biblical minimalists, this is not a comfortable development. For everyone else, it's a fascinating confirmation that the ancient world described in these texts was far more historically grounded than some scholars were willing to admit. Okay, but let's be real. Could any of this actually lead to the Ark itself? What would it even take to find it at this point? The Ark's odds. Could it ever actually be found? Let's talk honestly about the chances here, because the romanticized Indiana Jones version of this story and the archaeologically realistic version are very different things. The Ark was described as a chest made of acacia wood overlaid with gold. Wood, even sealed in gold, does not last forever, especially in the Middle Eastern climate, which is unforgiving to organic materials. Most mainstream historians believe that if the Ark was not taken away or hidden in a controlled environment, it almost certainly deteriorated over the centuries. The wood would have rotted. The gold could have been stripped off and melted down long ago, repurposed into coins or jewelry or tribute payments. After nearly 2,600 years since the Babylonian destruction of the First Temple, the physical object, absent extraordinary preservation conditions, may simply no longer exist in any recognizable form. That's the sober truth, and it's why no credible archaeologist is actively predicting that the Ark will turn up in a dig. The search has been ongoing in various forms for over a century, from legitimate academic excavations at sites across the Levant to fringe treasure hunters with metal detectors and paperback theories. And nothing has materialized. The Ark remains, in the formal archaeological record, entirely absent. What the Tel Shiloh discovery does, though, is something arguably more valuable for historians than finding a relic would be. It anchors the Ark's story in physical reality. The tabernacle was real. The sacrificial system was real. The religious community at Shiloh was real. Whether or not the chest itself ever surfaces, the world it existed in, the institutions, the practices, the geography, the people, has now been confirmed in ways that were impossible to say with certainty even 20 years ago. That's not nothing. In fact, for serious historians, that's quite a lot. And for the Ethiopian claim, until the guardian monk permits external examination, or until a future successor decides that transparency serves some greater good, that particular thread remains permanently tangled. The claim exists. The counter-evidence doesn't exist either. It's a historical ghost story with no resolution in sight, kept alive by faith, by tradition, and by the very human refusal to let the most dramatic mystery of the ancient world quietly close. So, after all of this, The bones, the blueprints, the stone structures, and the centuries of silence. What do we actually walk away knowing? And why does this discovery deserve so much more attention than the breathless headlines gave it? Here's the bottom line, and it's genuinely more interesting than you expect. No one found the Ark of the Covenant. But what researchers found at Tel Shiloh is something that serious historians did not expect to find so clearly or so completely. A physical, measurable, verifiable trace of the world that the Ark inhabited. A stone structure built to tabernacle proportions. Over 100,000 animal bones arranged in patterns matching the biblical sacrificial code. Ritual pottery from the exact Iron Age period when Shiloh was the religious capital of ancient Israel. Taken together, this is archaeology doing what it does at its absolute best, not proving faith and not disproving it, but giving us the ground under the story. The dirt, the bones, the stones that say, this happened here. The Ark itself. It's still out there in the mystery. Lost for roughly 1,500 years, possibly destroyed, possibly hidden, possibly sitting in a chapel in Ethiopia that no outsider is allowed to enter. The honest answer is that no one knows, and that's a fascinating place to be. Some mysteries don't resolve. They just get more interesting the closer you look. But Shiloh? Shiloh just got a whole lot more real. And if you found this as mind-bending as I did, hit subscribe because we go deep on stories like this every single week. History, archaeology, and the moments when the ancient world reaches up and taps us on the shoulder. Drop your theories about the Ark in the comments. I read every single one, and I'll see you in the next one.